Next dish we're going to do is smoked and fresh salmon fish cakes served with tomato coulis. So the ingredients for the fish cakes, very straightforward. We've got potato, some broccoli, some spring onions, some red pepper, some chilli, some lemon and some coriander. So that's the main ingredients on the vegetable side. Then of course we've got some fresh salmon and some smoked salmon. We're going to sneak a little bit of tomato sauce in there as well, salt and pepper, and then obviously as they're a fish cake we will pané them at the end with flour, egg and breadcrumbs. For the tomato coulis, only a few ingredients. We've got fresh tomatoes, some basil, some nice shallots and some garlic. We'll use salt and pepper again, and then I've also got approximately equal amounts of fresh water, white wine and some olive oil, and that's all we need. For our equipment, we've just got a board and a knife, chopping knife, so we can chop all of our basic ingredients. We've got a bowl to mix them all together and a couple of spoons to do that. For our sauce, just a medium heavyweight pan which we can cook our sauce in. We'll then puree it and pass it through a small conical strainer or chinois with a ladle, and then when we finish off our fish cakes, a pan just to quickly fry them in to get some colour. We're going to shallow fry them rather than deep fry them, so a little bit more healthy, and just a palette knife to turn, and that's it. So you can see here I've prepared all my ingredients. I've mashed my potato. To mash my potato for fish cakes we need the mix to be as dry as possible. If the mix is too wet, when we cook our fish cakes they'll start to collapse and they'll sink a little bit. We want them to maintain their shape. To get the mashed potato really dry, I've actually baked these potatoes like a jacket potato and then scooped the filling out and mashed it rather than peeling them and boiling them. So I've added no water whatsoever. They are baked potatoes that have been mashed. I've poached and flaked my salmon. My red pepper I've actually roasted in order to remove the skin and get some flavour in there, and then I've just cut it into around about 1 centimetre dice. My smoked salmon I've chopped. My broccoli I've just cut into tiny florets and I've just lightly blanched it so it's half cooked and in small pieces. My spring onions I've chopped and I've just fried them through a pan to get a bit of colour and just to take the raw edge off them, but they're not completely cooked. My coriander I've chopped, my chilli I've chopped, and I've got my lemon juice for squeezing. The method is very simple. We take our potato, pop it into the pan, we take our smoked salmon, our fresh salmon, and add that as well. You want about 75% salmon equivalent of potatoes. So if you had 100% potatoes, if you had 250 grams of potato, you want about 210, 220 grams of salmon, so it's not an exact combination. We add our smoked salmon, and basically we're adding all of our ingredients. So we add our chopped peppers, our broccoli, our spring onions, use a spoon for the chilli, our chopped coriander, a good squeeze of lemon juice. I've taken any seeds out of the lemon first so we know they're not going into our fish cake. A generous spoonful of tomato ketchup. Seasoning and some salt. Don't go mad with the salt because the smoked salmon will give a little bit of that flavour as well. All we're doing is mixing them all together. I'm turning them over. I'm trying not to smash everything to pieces, but at the same time I want the mix to be evenly spread amongst it. So it's important to get an even amount of all the ingredients together, but we're trying not to completely smash salmon. We still want there to be visible pieces of salmon in amongst our mix. Okay. What we're going to do now is we're going to pop that in the fridge and let it cool and let those flavours come together. Not let it cool, I should say, just let it chill down and come together, and then it will be a firmer mix that we can mould into our fish cake shapes. While that's in the fridge, we'll make our tomato coulis. The tomato coulis to go with the salmon, smoked salmon fish cakes is really, really easy. As I said, we've got some fresh tomatoes, some basil, shallots and garlic. The shallots and garlic I've just roughly chopped. We're going to be pureeing the tomato coulis, so there's no need to be too precise. We're just going to pop those in as they are. Pop in our garlic, depending on how much you like. You may go a little more, a little less. Tomatoes, we're just roughly cutting up. So I'm cutting these into quarters and then into eighths. Again, it will all be pureed, so we don't have to be too precise. Pop those in. We'll do one more. So they go in as well. Our basil, I've just literally got a few leaves there picked, and again they can go in whole. We're now going to add approximately equal quantities of fresh water, white wine and olive oil. So they all go in together. And what we're looking for is the mix is just about covered. No more than the level of ingredients, tomatoes and shallots, etc. We don't want to drown it. We pop that on the stove and we bring it up to the boil. After about 5 or 10 minutes, as it comes up to the boil, we turn it down to a simmer. And what will happen is all the water and the wine will start to evaporate, but the oil will remain. When we're at that stage, and we'll see later, we take it away from the heat, we'll adjust the seasoning with salt, pepper and maybe a little bit of sugar, and we puree the sauce. And that's it, finished. So while our tomato coulis is cooking away on the stove, we've come back to our fish cake mix. It's chilled a little now in the fridge, and we're going to mould it into the fish cakes that we want. Depending on whether you're making a starter or a main course, you might do a large fish cake, you might do small individual ones. We're going to go for something around about this size. There's two ways we can mould these. We can put a little bit of flour on our table and do the mix by hand. So we can just, I've got a little bit of flour in my hand still from dusting the table. You may use a palette knife just to straighten the sides, push down, and just keep going round and down. We don't want to add too much flour, because all it's going to be doing is adding to the flour when we pane, and we get too much of a crust on the fish cake. If you're happy to do them in this manner by hand with a palette knife, that's great. Just pop it there ready for paneing. If you wanted to, we can use a cutter. So I've just got a cutter there. This is useful if we're doing them maybe for a large party or a function and you want to guarantee for presentation purposes that every single fish cake is the same size. We can just use the mould. You might just need to take the top edge off with your palette knife. Again, it comes out. So that's all we're doing with our mix. We would then chill those again just for a few minutes, just so it's all nicely come together before we pane them. And that's the next stage done. So we're back at the stove with the tomato coulis, and as you can see it's now boiling away. So we need to turn the heat down just to a gentle simmer. Obviously the tomatoes are starting to break down, there's liquid coming out of the tomatoes and all of those flavours are coming together. What we're looking for now is just to keep simmering and just reducing down the amount of liquid. Eventually the water and the wine will have virtually evaporated and we'll just be left with the oil and all the other ingredients, and at that stage we'll puree the mix. And that will give us a really smooth, shiny tomato coulis. So we'll come back to that in a few minutes. So I've got my fish cakes back from the fridge. They've just chilled down again, and they're now nice and tight and firm, ready for panning. I've got some seasoned plain flour, some whole egg which have just been beaten with a little bit of water just to thin them down slightly, and I've got some natural breadcrumbs. These are just slices of natural white bread. It's been allowed to dry, and then it's been crumbed down, probably in a blender, just to give us a fine crumb, rather than using artificial breadcrumbs. Final tray is going to be for the finished fish cake. So the first job is just to pop a little bit of breadcrumb in the bottom of that tray, and that makes sure when we finish they're not going to stick. We then take our fish cake and we just gently turn it in the flour. We're very gentle to try and preserve the shape as best we can, and we pat off any excess flour. Pop it into the egg. I'm going to do both of mine, otherwise I end up doing flour, egg and breadcrumbs twice on my fingers, and they go very, very chunky, and I look like I've panicked myself. So I shall do each stage at the same time. So we've now got them in our eggs. We just give them a little shake. Again, run round, making sure that we've completely covered. We always do the bread first because the egg wouldn't stick to the fish cake completely, but it will stick to the flour. So the flour sticks to the fish cake, the egg sticks to the flour, and now the breadcrumbs will stick to the eggs. So we drain off the excess and we pop them into our breadcrumb mix. Quickly give them a little turn around. I'm paying particular attention to the sides to make sure it's very easy for the top and the bottom to be correctly covered, but we need to make sure that we're going all the way around the sides as well. If you're doing lots of these, it's best to have a separate person, if you're doing hundreds, to do each job, because as you can see, it can get extremely messy. What we can also do, just to be extra safe and give us a really nice crispy coating, once we've got to this stage, we return to the egg and we just do that last stage again. So I pop them back in the egg, exactly the same process, drain off the excess, back into the breadcrumbs, drain off the excess, and now we go round again, making sure that we're covering the edges, we're covering them all over, be quite generous. And pop them onto our tray. Shake off the excess again and back in the tray. And we'll return those once again to the fridge just for a few minutes before we pan fry them to get some colour, and we'll finish them through a hot oven. That's our fish cakes done. So we're back to our tomato coulis, and as you can see now, almost all of the liquid is gone, and what remains is virtually all oil. And if I just run my spoon through, you can actually see at the bottom of the pan, this mix is quite thick. When I'm dragging my spoon through, you can see the bottom of the pan before the liquid floods back in, because that there is the oil, and it's just really, really got quite thick. That's the stage we want it to. I'm going to turn that off, take it away, blitz it on a liquidizer, and I'm back with you in a moment. So I've liquidized my tomato coulis. I'm just pouring it now into my conical strainer, or you might call it a chinois. It's not the finest, it's about a medium pass on there, so that the bulk will go through, and what we're basically fishing out is little bits of tomato skin and seeds which haven't pureed down. So just push that final bit through, get as much of the liquor through as we can, and all we'll end up with is just the waste. So it's almost all gone through, and you can see that mix is just dry waste virtually now. All the liquid has gone through. So if we quickly have a look at that, it's already a lovely consistency for a sauce. It's got a nice shine to it, and what we need to do is actually, it's quite important, especially with tomatoes that can be quite acidic. We need to try that, and we need to adjust the seasoning. So I know that it's going to need some pepper, it's going to need some salt, and quite importantly with the tomato coulis, we need to add a little bit of sugar just to balance the acidity that's in the tomatoes and enable all the other flavours to come through. And just check that once more. That's good. That's our sauce. We'll leave that to one side and finish off our fish cakes. So I've collected my fish cakes from the fridge for the last time, and the breadcrumbs and all the egg mix and everything, again, they've just settled down as they've chilled, and we're ready to get some colour on them by pan frying them. You could deep fry them at this stage. It's a little bit healthier, and I just prefer to do a shallow fry rather than a deep fry if we can. I've got a medium gas flames, not too high. My pan is warm, and I'm just adding a little bit of oil. Probably more than if I was just cooking maybe some vegetables or something like that. You do need a little bit of depth to the oil, but you don't want too much oil. You're not going to send them swimming, but you've got a covering of the pan there. You just want that oil to warm through. Obviously we don't want it to smoke, but it will start just to have a haze, and when we're at that stage we'll add our fish cakes. That'll just take a few more seconds. We want them to start cooking as soon as we put them in the oil. The breadcrumbs will start to crisp up, will start to develop some colour. If the oil is cold, obviously the breadcrumbs will just soak all the oil up, and we won't get that cooking, we won't get that crispy edge. So we're just going to see how we're doing. You can see a haze, it's not quite there. Maybe just turn my gas up just a little bit, start waiting for that heat to come through. Go with the first one. So I've got my fish cake. I'm just making sure the excess breadcrumbs, if there are any from my tray, I've taken off. And I'm just very gently going to pop them down into the oil. I'm using my palette knife. I'm pushing them away from me, and I'm making sure that I don't get spat at. Now we have to be brave. If we try and move the fish cakes too early, before the breadcrumb and the egg have started to cook, breadcrumb will probably stick to the pan and will come away from the fish cake. So we need to be brave. In the same way when we fry fish, we need to let that skin cook before we turn it over, because we'll leave it in the pan and it will destroy our presentation. So we just have to be brave and just wait a few seconds before we turn them over or before we move them. So again, I'm very, very carefully turning them over. We've started to get that colour, but we haven't got burning. Again, we need to be a little bit brave and just wait. Just turn my pan down very slightly now. You can see we're starting just to get a tiny bit of smoke. Some of that's from the loose breadcrumbs that have come off the fish cakes. And what you'll find is the oil will start to soak just slightly up the breadcrumbs on the side. But what we can do is just very quickly wheel them round so we know that they've got an even coating all the way around the edges. We're not too worried about colouring them, but it just quickly cooks off the egg that's on our pane mix, and then we can pop them into a separate pan, and we will finish the fish cakes through the oven in order to make sure they're hot right through. Obviously if we left them in the pan for that length of time to heat right through to the middle, they would most definitely be burnt. So we're going to pop those in the oven now, probably for around about 10 or 12 minutes, and then we'll come back and plate them up. So our fish cakes have been in the oven for around about 10 minutes, so we'll just quickly pop them out, put them here. I return my sauce to the pan just to keep it warm. If you just put a little bit of sauce in the middle of the plate, use the ladle just to push it round so it's nice and neat. Make sure we don't make any drips. I'm just going to use 1 fish cake per portion, just slightly off to one side, and then maybe we might just use a little bit of garnish. We had some basil in the sauce, the tomato coulis. We had a little bit of coriander in the fish cake, but keep it nice and simple, nice and clean. Smoked and fresh salmon fish cakes with a tomato coulis.